Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Atlassian Enterprise Governance webinar. I want to start this webinar off by just apologizing for the shift in schedule if you were disrupted by that. Typically, these webinars are on Thursdays at 11 o'clock Central Time. However, last Thursday was Atlassian's annual Team 22 meeting in Las Vegas, first time that they had done that in person in 2 years. And I was there with several of my colleagues, and there was a lot of activity going on there. So we felt it probably wasn't a good time to do a webinar and shifted it to today instead. So if that created a disruption, then I do apologize. This webinar is being recorded and will be put on YouTube in the future. Well, speaking of Team 22, I think that's a kind of appropriate that we just came out of that, given the webinar topic of Atlassian Enterprise Governance. So I do want to start off today talking a little bit about what's happening in the Atlassian ecosystem and how that affects governance. But before I do that, let me jump into the high-level discussion and definition of what governance is and what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself too. My name is Steve Terrelmus. I'm the practice lead with Expium. All right, so when we use the term governance, obviously that's a very generic term that can mean a lot of different things. For purposes of this webinar, we're talking about Atlassian enterprise governance. Atlassian being, of course, the software ecosystem with Atlassian, enterprise being the your company. And we use that term loosely in this webinar. It could mean a small company, or it could mean an enterprise-wide, very large company. The importance of governance, of course, grows as the size of your company grows. And then governance. What do we mean by governance? We'll get into a more official definition of governance in a minute, but I kind of like to start with this picture because, as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think this picture well suits what my idea of governance is in an enterprise organization. So here you have a rocket ship and a control tower. Now, the rocket ship really is representative of your company and what your company does well. An important concept of governance is we want your company to be successful, and we don't want governance to be a distraction to what your company does well, or certainly a hindrance to the growth and trajectory and potential outcome of your company. So your company is the rocket ship out there doing great things, right? Governance is intended to be the control tower, a necessary and valuable function to ensure that the rocket performs safely and can achieve its expected destination successfully. To define the governance concepts, I've actually built this kind of silly acronym called ROCKET, very appropriately, with 6 different words that kind of are what I define as the components of governance. The first one is representation. Oftentimes in our companies, governance can be a very heavy-handed top-down type approach. And so we want to make sure that when we build our enterprise governance, especially in the Atlassian ecosystem, that we have good representation from the right people. Obviously, from a governance perspective, some will need to be executive people, right? Sometimes we need to write a check to purchase a piece of software. Sometimes we need to make a decision across a broad group of divisions. So we will need executive representation in our governance. However, we also want to make sure that that representation is ground level or grassroots representation as well. These are the people that are using the tool and understand the tool best. And so we can promote efficiency and success for the use of the tool if the representation of government is at the ground level as well. Openness. Companies are learning and have learned that those companies that are open in their communication, even vulnerable with employees as they share what they know and don't know with each other, wind up getting much further ahead than those that try to hoard information or are closed-minded. And so when we look at governance, we want that principle to apply there as well. The principle of openness will be demonstrated by the governance framework that we build. And we're going to talk about that later on in this webinar and some examples of a framework that promote and encourage openness. Coordination is going to be the conversations back and forth around the concepts of governance and around the business needs that make the rocket go that the governance group needs to be involved in. So this coordination is going to be important. We're going to need to make sure that the coordination is done well in an open environment. And so that goes hand in hand with the previous one of openness. Knowledge is going to be the understanding of the tool. So we're talking specifically in this webinar about the Atlassian enterprise governance. So you're going to want people in your governing circles that are knowledgeable about Atlassian tools. Don't create a governance paradigm around people that are familiar with IT governance or software governance, but do not have a direct impact or use in the tools itself. You want to have somebody that understands the Atlassian tools you're using. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time. I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I talk about what happened last week at Team 22. And some of the things we're seeing the ecosystem moving in and how it's so critical to make sure your governance is in a good position for that. Expertise is like wisdom. Like, it's not just I know the product, but I know how to practically apply the product and successfully apply it to the trajectory of my rocket as we create value in our own value stream. Expertise is kind of like wisdom, right? Knowledge and wisdom are different from each other. The way I heard it said once before is knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, right? That's a great little trivia piece you can give to people. But wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad, right? It doesn't go very well in a fruit salad, even though it may be technically a fruit. So knowledge and expertise go hand in hand to make sure that you know what you're doing and can apply it in the most successful ways. And then finally, teamwork. Atlassian actually is all about teamwork. If you ever look at their stock ticker on the stock exchange, they actually are, they're actually, ticker is TEAM. So that's, that is how, that's how we do our rocket. That's how we build our framework for promoting our enterprise governance. If we do this successfully, we're going to see things like aligned strategies in our organization, improved processes, better efficiencies. We're going to see the correct collaboration and coordination around purchasing products. Some of you may know, if you've been in the ecosystem for very long, that when you buy an Atlassian product like an add-on, you have to pay for the number of users in that product as you have the base Atlassian software product. So if you've got a macro-based product, like 10,000 users in Jira, and somebody wants to buy, say, Script Runner, you're going to be paying for it for 10,000 users. So it is really important that we do this framework of control tower with the rocket to make sure that we're maximizing the value that's there. So a silly little acronym: representation, openness, coordination, knowledge, expertise, and teamwork. That kind of helps define the overarching goal of what we mean by Atlassian enterprise governance. Okay, before we get a little bit further, and I'm going to kind of, throughout this webinar, I'm going to start at the very high level, and then I'm going to drill all the way down to the ground level, like right where your people are living on a day-to-day basis, right in the tools themselves, and how you can build governance frameworks that are excellent within the tools themselves. So we'll take that journey down to the ground level. But before I do that, I want to take a pause and talk a little bit about where Atlassian is right now in Team 22 last week. So if you follow the Atlassian ecosystem, in fact, the rest of the world for the last 2 years, you know that we've all been dealing with COVID. And as a result, many software companies and other companies have not been able to travel. And so this is the first time Atlassian had their Team 22 annual meeting in person in about 2 years. The last one they did was also in Las Vegas in 2019, and there were about 5,000 attendees there. This year, the attendee, as you can expect, the attendee number was much less. It was about 2,000 people. It was still a fantastic week. There was a lot of opportunity for customers and partners in Atlassian to reconnect with each other, and that was really wonderful. But it was a little bit of a thin attendance in person, as you might expect. there were probably, I think, about 15,000 people that registered online. By the way, the sessions for that Team 22 meetings are available online and can be picked up from Atlassian. Now, I want to focus a little bit more specifically on this idea of governance, though, and some of the things that are happening in the ecosystem. Okay, so Atlassian's a software company. So it's going through a series of phases. It's been around for about 20 years. For the last 15 years, Atlassian's been doing a great job of building fantastic products. So they started off with their benchmark product of Jira. They eventually grew into an aligned structured Jira with Jira Software. Then they got involved in Jira Service Desk, which then became Jira Service Management. If you've been in the ecosystem for any period of time, you've seen this growth. The result of this is they now have a full suite of robust products that not only serve teams who are working through their day-to-day work, but also are collaborative and open and can scale across multiple large enterprise organizations. Some of our customers have 50,000 users in their instance. So Atlassian has matured into a scaled product. However, even though they're a very large company, they have not gone to market as much as, say, Salesforce or ServiceNow, right? Their market cap is about $100 billion, which is quite impressive, but it still lags behind ServiceNow and Salesforce. And so they are now moving into the second phase, which is kind of their go-to-market phase, where they are taking these great products and they are now trying to get the market in general to know about them and to grow in them. Okay, what's actually happening as a result of that is a couple of things. First of all, in the areas of teamwork, Agile at scale is becoming a predominant element around things like Jira Software, advanced roadmaps, Jira Align products, right? Full enterprise service management suite of tools and ITSM are becoming a reality with Jira Software Service Management, which includes Jira Service Management, Insight, OpsGenie, Status Page, several other products as well. Okay, and now they are also expanding their Jira Work Management for non-DevOps teams like your legal department, HR department. All of this is designed to allow a massive amount of collaboration across the tools within your organization. Again, very much tied to this idea of the rocket ship and the control tower. However, it's important that as that happens, you are aware of that, because this is going to cause significant growth of the tool within your organization, especially enterprise organizations. It is going to raise questions of how many instances should we have? Should we all be living under one instance, or should we be doing multiple instances? How does that affect our governing policies? Should we have one governing body, or should we have multiple governing bodies? If we have multiple governing bodies, should we have a hub and spoke system, or how should we define the groups across different divisions in our company? The other area that Atlassian is growing in is the move to cloud. So Atlassian has been moving customers to cloud for several years now. However, it is only recently that the macro enterprise organizations are starting to look at them. The international banks, the large educational systems, right? Healthcare organizations, international and national groups. So there is a lot of activity now on the macro level of people moving to cloud. Huge questions around governance arise. Let me just give you an example. We are working with a customer right now that has over 150 server instances of Jira, and they are looking to migrate all of those to an enterprise cloud instance. As you know, the enterprise cloud instance of Atlassian allows you to have multiple cloud instances under one license. The questions they're asking me is, how do we control this? How do we make sure that people aren't spinning up other instances of Jira? Because every instance is free under the cloud enterprise instance. If somebody's out spinning up their own instance, they're actually paying for it and affecting the company's budget unnecessarily so, right? This lands squarely on the concept of governance. And so as Atlassian evolves into this second wave of scaling, growing as an organization, this concept of governance becomes crucial for your organization, not just for how you manage your tool, also how you collaborate your tool, how you manage your licensing, how you coordinate your licensing, consolidate your licensing. Here's a question: as you move from server to cloud, how many of the apps that you currently have in server are you going to need in cloud versus how many are already out there as out of the box solutions and therefore redundant? If you don't know the answers to these things, you need to work very closely with a partner. Many partners like XPM will provide you free starting conversations around that. For example, we have a marketing event we do once or twice a year called our Cloud Migration Workshop. In this workshop, we will actually build out for you a migration book that includes your timeline, your app assessment, your cost assessment, all of it. We do it in about 4 hours and it's free. Okay, so there's no reason not to engage in these things. Also, especially if you're a large customer, we're talking 5,000 plus users, you are going to be able to work with Atlassian on the cloud terms of service. Okay, and if you are working with Atlassian on the cloud terms of service, you are going to want to have a partner along there with you that can help you understand the cost changes that are going to take place moving from cloud to from server to cloud, what consolidation is going to happen, all that sort of thing. All right, so XPM does these things, and so if after this webinar, make sure you reach out to us and we can help start a conversation with you and get you pointed in the right direction. But my main point on this is, as I was at Team 22 last week, all the conversations I heard about where Atlassian is in their life cycle really made this idea of governance stand out very clearly to me. And so as we go through the rest of this webinar today, think about that. Think about not only the framework and the structures of governance that I talk about, but think about how that governance is going to be needed as Atlassian grows, as Atlassian shifts, and as you as a company need to grow and shift with that. Okay. When we talk about governance, I like to throw a vision out there, a vision statement for governance. What is our governance vision? I've defined it this way. You can write your own governance vision if you want to, and you can borrow this if you want to. I don't mind. But this is my definition of the governance vision. So we want to ensure an ongoing balance between enterprise goals and enterprise growth via flexible controls managed directly by the employees who best understand the purpose and value of Atlassian products across the organization. Notice the two words there that I highlighted in red: balance and employees. Balance, because like I said in the rocket diagram, it's going to take both sides. We don't want it to be too heavy-handed. We also want it to be grassroots. We want it to go both ways. Also managed directly by the employees, because the employees are the ones that use the tool and understand the tool. So that's really important that the employees are involved in this. And you'll see when we talk about the structure and framework of governance, how we incorporate intentionally that balance in those employees. Okay, what's the purpose? So if that's the vision of governance, what are we trying to accomplish here? The governing body, this is what we're building here, right? The control tower. The governing body will support the creation, discussion, decision, and implementation of Atlassian products, apps, components, and configuration. Notice the word support, of course. This is going to be critical, but it is always a supporting role. And so it's going to be supporting those actions tied to those objects. So actions of discussion, decision, implementation, tied to the objects of the Atlassian products, apps, components, and configuration. Standardization, what workflows should be standard versus what should be customized? What products need to be purchased? How many users do we have? And what impact is that going to have on cost when we purchase products? Things like that all fall into the purpose. All right, so that's kind of the 10,000 foot level. Let's move a little bit closer to the ground level. Here are some of the areas that governance will affect your organization. If I look at these bubbles across the top, I'm talking primarily about products. And if I'm looking at the bottom, I'm talking primarily about activities. So this kind of goes to our governance purpose and breaks out that purpose a little bit more detailed around products and activities. So obviously products like Confluence. How are you managing your spaces in Confluence? Confluence is not a documentation tool only, right? It's not like Microsoft Word. It is a content portal complete with visualization macros. You can have entire spaces that do not have any content in them whatsoever. They're just pages created that have macros that create dashboards that represent information that is being automatically pulled from other spaces, right? So when you build out your Confluence product, who gets to determine which spaces are which? Which of your spaces are macro spaces versus micro spaces? I'll give you an example. If you have Confluence, you should have a governance space. There should only be one governance space in your entire organization. And that governance space should be open to every employee, even people that are not in Confluence, right? So that's like a governing principle for Confluence. Having these governing principles in Confluence are super important. If you've lived in Confluence for very long at all, I'm quite sure you know that it can easily turn into a hot mess without governing principles. How about Jira? How many admins do you have in Jira as a relationship to the user count? Which of your Jira structures in configurations are standardized versus customized? Why would you allow a customized configuration? Things like that. How about source control governance? What are your source control tools that you use? Are you using Bitbucket? Are you using GitHub? What are those products and how are you governing and managing those products? Who has the ability to coordinate and administer those? How about the various portfolio tools that exist out there? People use Jira for portfolio management. They use advanced roadmaps for portfolio management. They use Jira Line for portfolio management and scaling. There are all kinds of possible combinations of ways to manage what I call the future of work, right? Once you move out of individual project teams and boards, which is kind of the past and present of work, you are now looking at the future and need other tools. What are the tools that you use? Which teams use which tools? What standardization is going to be necessary in order to scale into a tool like Jira Line? All of these require a high level of governance and understanding of the tool. If you are doing any kind of Agile at scale activity, it's likely that you actually have some sort of governing body already in what may be called something like a LACE, Lean Agile Center of Excellence. That is going to be a process governing body. It is not going to be a tool-based governing body. So there may need to be a different governing body for Atlassian tools that works in parallel with the LACE. And maybe many of the members of the LACE are also members of the governing bodies as well. So lots of these products out there and a growing list of products as well. When do you use Jira Service Management? What possibilities are there for saving user licenses in Jira Service Management if you migrate that with Jira Software Teams, right? Or if you come in from a different service desk tool like Zendesk or ServiceNow, if you migrate that into Jira Service Management, what kind of savings can you have in consolidating users into the collaborative suite of Atlassian tools? How is that going to be governed? All of these are really important questions. Down at the bottom are the practices around governance. So you're going to have your governing policies, best practices. Again, make sure that the people in the grassroots level are involved in this because they're the ones that are going to know the best practices. Who are your governing bodies? What bodies do you have? And who are the people in there, right? Atlassian governance framework tools. How are you going to make this entire governance structure visible for everybody in the company? Fortunately, Atlassian has already provided us 2 great tools for that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And then finally, how-to articles. As people are learning things, how to do things, new employees are coming in and they are confused about Atlassian products, building how-to articles that are visible for them can also be part of this as well. All of these products and practices are going to be working through what I kind of call the 4 goals of governance. These goals are scalable growth, visible control, user ownership, and knowledge sharing. If you structure your governance policies and governance bodies and governance framework around these 4 goals, you will have success. Scalable growth is going to be building things in such a way that as you grow, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. New growth factors can be played in. We're trying to build machines here so that when a new growth opportunity comes along, we're just creating another machine and then we're just cranking through that. Visible control. Yes, governance does need to represent a certain amount of control. However, it should always be visible, right? You want people to see this. As I said earlier with your Confluence, you ought to have a governance space that everybody can see. Uh, if people know what you're doing in governance, then not only does that save a lot of emails and a lot of conversations, it also creates the excitement and that's needed for grassroots participation in governance. User ownership. The people that know the tools best ought to have some sort of ownership in governance. They ought to have a voice at the table. And then finally, knowledge sharing. Obviously, companies that share knowledge succeed well ahead of their peers. And so we're going to build a governance framework that promotes knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing in governance, knowledge sharing in products. And if we do this right, we can even reconstruct this framework for other software products that we use in our enterprise organizations as well. All right, we're moving down now, even closer to the ground level. The things we're going to talk about next are the 3 governance pillars. They are your governance structure. This is going to be the who and the bodies that are going to basically represent governance activities and what decisions are made. The governance framework. This is that open visibility we're going to create. This is going to allow you to have a tool that is going to be super efficient for processes and also widely open for people that are interested in knowing what's going on or participating within Atlassian governance. And then finally, governing policies. What rules and policies do we need to put in place? How do we track those policies? How do people review them if they don't know they exist? When do you change those policies? So those are the 3 pillars that are going to support our ground level day-to-day activities. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Before I do that though, I want to talk a little bit about Expium. Whenever I talk to a new sales lead, I always tell them, I need to tell you why you're talking to a company called Expium instead of Atlassian, right? So for years, Atlassian has made fantastic software, but they've leaned heavily on their partner network for things like licensing, implementation, consulting, and things like that. It's been a fantastic, successful, I would say, symbiotic relationship between partners and Atlassian that's lasted for many years and will continue in the future. There are a limited number of platinum solution partners out there that have specializations, and Expium is one of them. There's only about 20 platinum solution partners in the United States. We are a full service solutions partner, which means that we can do all of the things that you see on this page. Let me talk quickly about a few of them. Training. Our training is not like what I'm giving you right now in a webinar. I can't give you good training in a webinar because I have to give you slides. If you come to one of our training classes, you won't get slides. You'll become an active participant in an instance where you will do workshops in that instance directly. When you're done with the training, you will have built out a framework of things in that instance that you can actually use in your company. So we do hands-on workshop-based training, not slide-based training. Consulting, all of the consultants that work at Expium are fully certified with Atlassian. They all have a deep understanding of either business or technical expertise. And we've been very successful with companies on consulting. So if you have any consulting needs with products or strategies, let us know. We are a products first consulting company, which is to say, for example, if you are interested in Agile at Scale, we have multiple people that are SPC certified, scaled professional consultants. However, we will approach your Agile at Scale from the perspective of the tool because that's what we know. But from a strategy perspective, we will promote the healthy balance of people first, followed by processes, and then tools. We try to not drive processes and people with tools. That's usually not a recipe for success. So we have an understanding of things like Agile at Scale. We are SBC certified. We are ITIL certified. So we have an understanding of ITSM, good ITSM strategy, and we're Atlassian certified. But we are Atlassian partners first and foremost. Custom development. Expium grew out of a full stack software development company called Oasis Digital that still exists, is our sister company, and works hand in hand with us in our office. As a result, we actually can build customized solutions within the Atlassian tools We can build customized solutions to connect to third-party software, and we can build customized visualization tools that sit on top of our software. And actually, this is the first webinar that I'm able to announce, because it just became public last week, that XBM won the technical award this year for Atlassian for building a custom portal for an automobile industry to manage their assets on top of Atlassian software. So we have done this several times, and we can build custom portals or skins and things like that where users or customers don't even see the Atlassian tools. They just see a custom interface. And then finally, licensing. This is the weirdest one. So in many industries, if a partner is gonna tell you that they can license for you, you will wind up paying a additional fee to that partner, because of course you're adding a new member in the value chain, right? In the Atlassian ecosystems, one of the things that Atlassian did that was brilliant many years ago is they set up a structure in the partner relationship so that partners can get licensing at the same cost as Atlassian sells it. So if you are a customer licensing Atlassian tools, it makes no sense for you to license it directly with Atlassian. In fact, at Team 22 last week, Atlassian announced that 70% of all customers license through a partner, and they are strategically driving that number to 90% over the next year. So if you are licensing directly to Atlassian, you are in a minority, and you are losing money, and you are losing value. The value with licensing with a partner is, first of all, oftentimes we can actually get you a better rate than what I like to call the MSRP or public rate on licensing. Secondly, if you are licensing with a company like Atlassian or like XBM, us, you now have a direct relationship with us, which means that when you email me, I know who you are. And if you have a basic question of, hey, something broke on my workflow and I can't figure it out, and it takes about 5 minutes to solve it, we'll do that for free for you, okay? If you need a budgetary quote, or if you need to expand your users and you want to know how much it's going to cost, we will give you a quote for free. If you are migrating from cloud to server, we will give you a quick overview assessment on how to do that for free, okay? So again, if you are not licensing with a partner like XBM, you are leaving significant amounts of value on the table. And I know that's unusual for a software industry. If you don't believe me, call me afterwards. I'll give you more details. Okay, let's rock and roll. Down to the ground level. How do we implement governance concepts using the Atlassian tools? We're now talking about that pillar, that governance pillar of governance framework. What framework does this entire thing live in, right? It's great to talk about a rocket, right? But unless you're Elon Musk, that doesn't really apply. Steve, how do I actually build out what you're talking about in a tool? Tell me how to make the theoretical practical. Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the webinar. So to do that, I'm going to flip over into the tool itself. So just like in our training classes, we are just going to show you how it's done. And you can, all the things I'm going to show you here are basically out of the box. There's no customization here whatsoever. Everything that you can do here, you do out of the box. So there are two aspects to governance that live on the ground level. One is actions, and the other one is content. And as you would expect, Atlassian has two great products to manage those. Actions are done in Jira. Content is done in Confluence. So let's talk about the actions first in Jira. So first of all is going to be the need for visualization. I'm going to kind of start with the end and then work my way back to the beginning. So if you have a governance framework that's stood up correctly in Jira, you should be able to build out a governance dashboard like what I'm showing you right here. The dashboard is going to show your governance issues that are currently open, the status of those governance issues, maybe the assignee. It's going to be able to show you perhaps a grid of different elements or fields that are captured out of governance issues, maybe a pie chart of various open issue types that are existing. How about an issue statistic graph that tells you what percentage of each of your issues exist in each issue type across your governance platform? Maybe an activity stream of recent activities. If you guys have done anything with governance or with dashboards in Jira, you know you can build a bunch of gadgets like this. This is just a few random examples of some of them. But look at some of these activities that we might be having, right? So a user product request. If we have lots of users in our instance, they're going to want to do some research, some investigation, finding products in the marketplace that they want to buy, and they're going to want to buy those. That's going to cost money. It's going to cost money for every user in the tool. So perhaps that would be a good process to go through the governance as an action. We'll talk a little bit more detail around how that could play out. How about a policy? This might be an annual policy, right? So here we have a policy that we need to build around governance. Maybe we want to set up an intentional process where every year we verify that that policy should remain, or maybe it needs to be edited or changed. Purchases. Once a product request has gone through a governance process, we might decide to actually purchase that add-on. And so that purchase itself might have to go through a workflow. Nominations. If we have governing bodies, then we're probably going to want warm bodies in those seats. And so periodically we might want to do a nomination for an empty seat. Policy change. What if something happens and we need to change a policy? Maybe we need to set up a workflow around that. System request. What if we need to do something with the platform, right? So one of the things we really drive home with our consulting is differentiating between product and platform. Example, product. I want to change a status in a workflow, in a standard workflow, right? That might be a product governance issue. Platform, I want to move one of my instances from server to cloud, right? Or I need to add access, which is a SSO user management tool, right? So there's a difference between system requests and product requests. And then variance, maybe that's like a policy violation or something, right? So these are some activities that you might be tracking in Jira. This is a governance project in Jira with a simple board that shows where all these activities are, either in to-do or in progress or done. Because there's various types of activities in your governance project and they may all have different workflows, I tried to keep this board simple, but you might want to actually add other columns, like anytime a particular issue is in committee, you might want to add a board for that, or a swim lane for that, or a column for that to visualize it. But this is a great way of seeing a lot of different information in a snapshot. And of course, as you know, with Atlassian tools, if you've ever used them, anytime you're on a board, not only is it a visualization tool, but it's an action tool as well, which means that you can literally move the issues themselves along the workflow by clicking and dragging across the columns. How about the project itself? So I'm in the project itself. The governance project would likely be open to your entire organization so that anybody can create a governance ticket, but would be managed by key people in the governing team. So I might be a governing team member looking at the list of issues right now. So that's an example of a current filter of well, I guess this would be all my issues right now in the Atlassian governance project. If I go down into my project settings, I see again the different issue types, the different actions that I've allowed users to create. I can expand these, I can make more if I want to. But the key point I wanted to show you here, and now I'm kind of going all the way to the really the ground level here, is how the governing body framework can define the workflow or the life cycle of an issue, track that issue, process that issue, make that process visible. Let's take a look at one of these. How about a user product request workflow? This is a great one. Hopefully you can see this. I know it's a little small, but I'll work through it real quick with you. So let's suppose you have a 5,000 user instance, and Bob in one particular train, in one particular DevOps team within that train, decides that there's a really great add-on that will help his team be able to visualize things. But if he goes and buys that, you got to pay it for like all 5,000 users. So instead of just calling somebody, or maybe Bob has no idea who even to talk to about buying a product, all he needs to do is open a ticket. And he can just go up here to the create button in Jira, like you always do, create a ticket for a product request. The next step in the ticket is going to be research. Again, this is an example of how you can do it. You can set it up any way you want to, but let's suppose that you, as a governing process, require research. Now, Bob's the one who wants to buy this add-on, so maybe Bob's the one that should do the research on it. Make sure he understands how the product works, how much the product costs based on the open marketplace price. If he's using a partner, maybe he can get it cheaper, but at least he can start by getting an idea of what the MSRP is, right? Then Bob goes and gathers interest. He talks to the other team members in his Scrum team about the product. They are like, man, Bob, this is a fantastic idea. And I like the research you did on it because it really shows how great this product could be used. Let's go talk to team C, D, E, and F about it. And so then they all go talk to team C, D, and F. And maybe they even start talking to other release teams about it. And as time goes by, you have this grassroots groundswell of support for this product. By the way, notice nobody's had to have a meeting on this. Nobody's had to call the governing body together and ask a question. Nobody's had to send an email to anybody yet. This is all happening organically via the processes and open visibility in the tool. Finally, Bob has about 100 people or 200 people that are interested in this tool. And he says, I think I've got enough interest to then notify the governing body about this. By the way, you can actually use the voting button in a ticket to do that in a Jira ticket. So then Bob notifies the governing body, or maybe the governing body gets notified automatically. Anytime a vote count goes up to plus 200, the governing body automatically gets that ticket that shows up on their dashboard as an agenda item for their next meeting or something like that. So Sally's in the governing body, and she recognizes this ticket comes in on her dashboard as an agenda item for the next meeting because it's gotten 200 plus votes on it. And so she looks at the reporter, who's Bob, and she reaches out to Bob. She doesn't need to email him. She can put it right in the comments of the ticket. Hey, Bob, congratulations. I see that your product request reached 200 votes. Let's talk about, or can you come to the next policy meeting and talk about why you think this is a good product? And so it then gets presented to the governing body. At that point, maybe it goes on hold, maybe it gets closed, maybe it gets pushed forward for purchasing. Purchasing then goes through its process. This can be a completely separate nested workflow. And then after that, after it gets purchased, it then needs to be brought into the tool. This becomes a system process. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about system governing bodies versus product governing bodies, but maybe it needs to go through a system governing body for configuration and implementation. Bob can be very instrumental in that as well. And then finally, once it's implemented, there's going to need to be some artifacts or documentation, and that's going to have to be assigned to somebody who better than Bob, who's been championing this product all along. And so Bob writes the document about it, and he puts it in our Confluence shared governing space, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And then it gets closed. Now, one of the beautiful things about this entire process that I haven't even mentioned yet is that, let's say 5 years go by. Let's say, for instance, that Bob presents this to the governing body, and for some reason they decide not to do it, and it gets closed. Well, let's say 5 years go by and Bob is gone, and along comes Harry, and Harry is like, this is a great product, best product ever saw, and he starts the process all over again. Well, because of what Bob did, Harry doesn't even need to do this. He can just do some research, pull up the old ticket, excuse me, and then look at the old ticket and see all of the history on the old ticket. And he can figure out why it was that the governing body decided not to buy it 5 years earlier. Maybe things have changed, and he has that information. It's all there. It's all openly visible. It is all an incredibly efficient process. Okay, so that's an example of how we would use the Jira structure or the Jira framework for governing activities that we want to do in order to maintain all of those governing goals that we talked about earlier: open visibility, knowledge sharing, user control, all of that. Okay, let's talk about the content around governance. So content, of course, is managed in Atlassian's Confluence tool. So here's an example of a governance space. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I think this is worth mentioning again. If you are going to be doing any kind of governance, you want to do that in Confluence. You want to put it in a governance space. You want that governance space open to everyone. This is one of those spaces that I like to call a macro space. It does no one any good if you're building a bunch of great information around governance and then half the company can't see it. Even employees that are not users in Atlassian should have access to this. Why? Because there's going to be things in here that are going to, number one, promote Atlassian to other teams. Number two, help those teams understand how to get Atlassian implemented if they want to grow into the Atlassian ecosystem. Number three, connect those people that are not involved with Atlassian to the people who are, especially in the governing bodies, so that they know they don't need to ask around to figure out who's who, all kinds of things, right? So broad user access and visibility around this. Let's take a quick look at this. This is the home page here. On the home page, you might want to just plant firmly your purpose or your vision right here, like we talked about earlier. You might want to have some high-level diagrams. Like this is the one I talked about before, where your goals and components. This is one I'll talk about in a minute, which is a framework of a governing body. Some other odds and ends. If there are some articles or videos that are relevant, maybe you would want people to see those to learn about them. You can put them right there. And various other things like how-to articles, recent updates, and things like that. So all of that is right there on the homepage. You can structure that however you want to. Excuse me. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the 3 pillars. So the governance framework that we talked about is what I'm showing you here. Jira for actions, Confluence for content. The governance structure is going to be the governing bodies. Who are the people and what are the governing bodies that are involved in the governing structure? Here's an example of how that could be built. And I'll get into a little bit more detail in a second, but let me quick give you the diagram. So we call this the governance triangle. This would be for a medium-sized company. You might have 3 governing bodies. At the top would be a steering committee. The steering committee is going to be comprised of a small number of people. 2 people that definitely need to be in the steering committee are the guy who can write the check or make final decisions across macro events, and probably your key Jira administrator or key Atlassian administrator. But you may have 2 or 3 others as well. They're going to be responsible for governance management, setting the governance vision, etc., that sort of thing, purchasing, communication in response to governance groups. And then there may need to be 1 person who is a liaison down to what I call the system admin group and the product admin group. These are 2 grassroots governance bodies, and they serve very different purposes. So the system admin group is going to be responsible for system activity within the Atlassian ecosystem. Examples of that are your platforms, your user activity, as far as which users get access to which products and things like that. The product admin group is going to be responsible for governing the actual products themselves. An example of that might be which of our workflows are we going to define as standard workflows? How many admins are we going to have in Jira, and who are those admins going to be? That's like product. A great example is, again, going back to the add-on purchase that Bob wanted. The system admin group is going to implement the add-on into the tool once it's purchased. The product admin group is going to decide whether or not we are going to purchase the add-on. So that's an example of that. So product admin group is going to include functional software, tool configuration, tool security, as in like permissions within the tool, and user management within the tool, like groups and roles and things like that. The system admin group is going to manage user and communication software, like do we have a user software like Access or Crowd? It's going to manage the hardware management. What platform does it sit on? It's going to manage security and compliance, and also immediate user access. So like the AD admin, the Active Directory admin, would probably be in the system admin group. Once users have access to the tools, the product admin group would probably define how those users are managed in the tools. And those different bodies would likely have liaisons, or a liaison that reports up to the steering committee, as well as some liaisons that report down to this ground level. This ground level is not really a governing body. It just represents the other active users. I put it down here again to promote this idea of grassroots activity. Project managers, product managers, development managers, and maybe even super users are going to be in this group. And by the way, some of those people will also have roles in the groups above, right? Especially the product admin group. Okay, so that's an example of a governing structure, the governing bodies that are necessary. How do we promote open visibility of these governing bodies? Let's go back to this diagram here. you are going to have a section in your Confluence space for each of these governing bodies. That section will be broken out to help people understand what the purpose of the governing body is. This is the products admin group. What the structure, for example, this group should be comprised of at least one liaison from each department using Atlassian products, as well as the Atlassian Steering Committee chairperson and 3 to 4 other Atlassian subject matter experts. Now, I don't want to be prescriptive on how you do it, but the key is that once you've defined it, by putting it here in this document, in this section in Confluence, in this Confluence governance space, everybody in your organization knows exactly what is defined by the Atlassian product admin group. They also know who the members are if they need to get a hold of somebody. They also have the meeting notes. Maybe one of the members has an action item. Maybe you are in the process, let's see if I can pull this page up here. I think this is the one, this is the system admin group. Yeah, maybe you're in the process of nominating an open position. They can see that there's an open position. They can even see the ticket in Jira that is tracking that open position. In this particular case, Brian Darr is the nominee. Maybe it is currently open. Maybe it's in voting status, whatever. All of this is completely available, saving you hours of time in phone calls, emails, and questions. Okay. So that is the governing bodies and how they are defined within the Confluence space. Continuing, let's look at policies and standards. Policies and standards are where you're going to have a rich set of information for your users around lessons learned, best practices, standardization of structures, what can be standardized, what can be customized. Here's a couple examples. For example, here is a diagram that defines what a standard Jira project structure looks like. This project structure is the same for every project you have in Jira, regardless of what type of users or teams are using it. They all have an issue type and an issue type scheme. They all have workflows and workflow schemes. This framework is critically important for anyone who is new to the Atlassian ecosystem and wants to build things out. Example, I've got a new HR team that wants to do onboarding in Jira. What do? They come to the Atlassian governance space. They pull this up. They go to a onboarding, meaning I want to join Jira, onboarding information document that the governing body has written for anybody that wants to come into Jira. That will define several things in here. One will be around the activities that they do. They can then build out their entire framework of a project and have those conversations internally with their HR department around what does onboarding mean for HR? What's the workflow? What are the issue types that they might want and things like that, right? What are the necessary fields that we need to collect? They can put all that together before they even talk to the governing body. Then they can bring it to the governing body and say, here you go. And they already know that the framework that they've built fits within the framework that's standardized by the governing body because the information's openly available for them. The only question at that point is, are any of the detailed components going to be standardized or customized or allowed or not allowed or whatever? It takes a week-long conversation and it boils it down to about 2 hours. All right, moving along here because I know we're almost out of time, but you can have all kinds of policies and standards. You can have policies and standards for administrators, like how to archive a project, how to do integrations. You can do policies and standards for users, which will be very different, like what is a workflow? How do we manage our issue hierarchies and what does that look like? Things like that, right? You might even have a section that is called policies in progress. This is something new somebody's working on. There's a list of policies in progress. Oh, hey, look, these are actually, if they're in progress, there's actions going on. So we've embedded a Jira filter with the actual policies that are in progress going on here from Jira, right? So all kinds of activities that you can do there. Some other things that you might include in your governing space are how-to articles. As you may have a requirement out there that says any user who actually needs to do something in Jira might learn something with an add-on or with a feature or with a process or with configuration. Before you close the book on that, go write a how-to article and dump it out there for future uses. Okay, so that's that. If you are now, if you're just starting to implement governance, you might even have another section down here that says governance implementation timeline so that everybody can see that. And guess what? That can also be in a Jira Advanced roadmap embedded within a Confluence space as well. So, all right, that's kind of like the grassroots ground level activity around this kind of thing. This is going to be the details around what you need to do to actually build that framework out. So this kind of brings me to the conclusion of my of the webinar as far as the comments and the things that I was going to show you on the webinar. Let me just go back real quickly here and take us to the last slide. And just say, if you have any questions, there are some upcoming activities that we have, upcoming webinar classes. You can email me here at this email address if you want to talk more about that. But if you have any questions right now, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them here in the next few minutes before we wrap up the call. All right, one quick question that showed up is, what if we are new to this and we want to implement this? What's a good first step? Well, I'm going to say this. The first thing you probably want to do is give me a call. Reach out to me. I need to assess exactly how new you are and where you need to go. But I can help navigate that for you a little bit. Depending on where you are, what your knowledge base is, you may not even need our help in setting this up, but I can talk to you for a half an hour and help assess that with you. But really, the best place to start is right here and right now, right? So depending on where you are in the process, you may need to have some, build out some assessment so that you can have a conversation with an executive champion, especially if you're in a very large organization that has a lot of Atlassian activity. Governance is not something you want to take on by yourself if you're just a Jira admin, right? You have a really good understanding of maybe what needs to be done, but you may not necessarily have the let's just say the political clout to get it done. And so we can help put that assessment together for you. You'll want to start meeting with people, teams, find out what's going on out there, what needs there are, and things like that. But really, we can help you kind of define what that is. So reach out to me and let me know, and I can help you out with that. Okay, thank you so much for participating here in the webinar. I hope this has been useful. The governance is becoming a critical element of the Atlassian ecosystem, especially around the changes that are happening with Atlassian as they grow in scale and go to market with enterprise customers. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for joining us, and we will hopefully see you somewhere out there in the Atlassian ecosystem. Thanks. Take care.